Welcome to RDG. It's that time of year again when that age-old question comes around, how do you roast a turkey? And for me, I get the phone call every year with the same question, how do you roast a turkey? All the magazines have published different ways of doing it, some of them crazy, some not so crazy. So I thought I would throw my hat into the ring and show you how I roast a turkey. And it turns out very, very well. So to start, all we need is two things. A turkey and a good roasting pan, and that's where we'll start. To roast a good turkey, you have to solve two riddles. The first riddle is, you cannot roast a turkey by baking it. So what do you mean by that? Well, I figured this out. Let's say you want to have a cake. So you go to the store and you buy a box cake, or you get a recipe for a box cake, and you read the directions, and it usually says, preheat the oven to 350. Then you mix the ingredients together, stir them up, put them in a cake pan, and depending on the size of the cake, you put in that oven for X amount of time until it's done. Usually a skewer comes out clean, and you've just baked a cake. Now let's say you want to roast a turkey. Well, you read the directions from the recipe, or sometimes even on the package of the turkey, and it will invariably say, preheated oven to 350, put the turkey in, and depending on how big it is, roast it for so long. So you have to say, hey, wait a minute. I just baked a cake under the same conditions in the same oven that I'm going to roast a turkey in. Something must be wrong here. So that's the first clue, that you can't roast a turkey by baking it. The second little riddle is, how do you cook two things at the same time in the same oven that cook at different rates but will have to be done at the same time? That's very typical of a turkey, and the turkey roasting problem is that the bird itself is made up of two parts, the part that sort of flies, the wings and the breast, and the part that runs or walks, the legs. And they roast at different times because they're made up of different sort of muscle structures. Except it's one turkey, they're hooked together. And that always happens at Thanksgiving. The classic one for all the years was that when the breast is moist and juicy, the legs are still undercooked. When the legs are finally cooked, the breast is kind of dry. So these are the two things that we have to solve. How do we roast a turkey by not baking it, and how do we get the legs and the breast to be done at the same time and both be moist and juicy? So we have our two riddles now about the problem of roasting a turkey, and they're a little bit related, but the solution requires time travel. Any good solution has to have time travel involved. So let's do a little time travel. This is how we can do it together. If you were to go in your kitchen and look at your stove, see where you're going to roast this turkey by not baking it, then just go backwards in time. And not a long way back, but as you go back over the 10, 15, 20, 100 years of cycle, your stove will probably go from electric or gas to some sort of coal or wood burning stove. And then eventually that stove will disappear altogether and turn into a fireplace. There won't be a stove, but a fireplace. And if you keep going backwards in time, eventually there'll be a hearth, a sort of circle in the floor where you build a fire to cook your food. And I'm not talking thousands of years, I'm talking just a couple hundred, you'll get to that sort of point. So that tells us something about how we cook things in the old days versus currently. And in those days, if you wanted to grill something, you would put it over the fire. If you wanted to bake something, you would put it in a container and push it into the coals, sometimes with the lid with the coals on top. And if you wanted to roast something, such as a turkey, you would put it in front of the fire, where the bird would face the fire. So that's a big clue that this is not inside the coals, but this is in front of the fire where that infrared heat comes out. And it provides a very important clue, which is it's hot on one side and cold on the other, right? The part of the bird facing the fire is hot and the other side is cold. So it's obvious we have to turn it or rotate it, so we get this idea of a rotisserie, that it's a little bit of a not even baking, but uneven roasting, hot and then cold, hot and then cold. So this is a very big change from baking. This is sort of roasting now. And it solves a little bit of our second riddle, which how do you cook two things at the same time that cook at different rates? Well, when you have a turkey, one thing you'll notice with it is that the legs tend to stick out a little farther than the breast does, right? They would be closer to the fire. Well, now in physics, you know, though that type of heat increases by the square of the distance. And you know this when you're at a fireplace, you put your hands in front, it's nice and warm. You move a little bit closer, it gets a lot hotter a lot faster. So that part of the leg will be taking a little bit more heat than the breast. The other thing is, as it rotates, where the breast is away from the fire, the thighs, this part of it, are still exposed to the heat. So in a way, in a rotisserie, as that bird is going around, those legs are taking on much more heat than they normally would. So they're actually cooking a little faster than the breast would be. So somehow then, following this time travel experiment, we need to come back with the present with our stove, not our fireplace, although you can do an excellent job with a turkey in front of the fireplace. We need to somehow mimic a rotisserie in front of a fireplace inside our oven, and that's what we're going to do. So this is how we're going to roast a turkey. We're going to mimic a rotisserie, like cooking from a fireplace, in our oven. Now normally on a rotisserie, to get that bird to rotate, it's going to be clamped. There's going to be some sort of apparatus on it that allows us to turn it. And this actually is a little more interesting than you would think, because at Thanksgiving, even when I've cooked turkeys over the years, one thing sometimes happens, actually quite frequently. After the bird has been fully cooked, you go to cut off the legs, as those legs open up, and sort of this pink watery juice flows out of the cutting board. And for some reason, when you carve a turkey, all the relatives and friends are standing around, like a theater, and they're sort of like, oh my God, the turkey's not cooked. You know, really, the turkey can be cooked, but that juice kind of piles up inside the legs there, and it actually stops those legs from cooking because those juices have to heat up. But on a rotisserie with that clamp, this wouldn't happen. So the first thing is to turn this turkey over onto its back, and imagine we were going to clamp it. You go down along the back with the knife where the legs are, and you'll usually can find a little spot, and you just kind of poke. If it's bone, you'll find a spot where you can go into the thigh, usually right about where the thigh joins, and you can actually, with your finger, push a hole through there into and feel the inside of the thigh. So it makes a little bit of a hole just like that clamp would go in. And that hole, when the turkey is turned the other way, is going to let those juices, it's really not juice, it's more just water that collects, stream out, and the legs will then cook faster. So we do one on each side, and there's really nothing to this. If you're against the bone, the knife won't go in, so you just kind of fidget around until you find where, oh, there we go. It goes right in. You kind of cut that hole open a little bit, and then I just push my finger in there to kind of make two little exhaust pipes, just like that clamp would be on there for the bird to rotate. Okay, so that's the first thing. That's going to let those juices come out, very much like a rotisserie. When we talked about you can't roast a turkey by baking it, all the recipes start the same. Preheat your oven to 350 degrees or whatever temperature. Don't preheat the oven. The oven should be cold, right? And what you're going to do is, we're going to use the broiler. And that broiler on the top of the oven is basically a fireplace sort of turned upside down. It's very hot infrared heat. So with the rack on the lowest level, because these turkeys probably, depending on the size of yours, will just fit in the oven, I put the turkey breast down in the roasting pan with the back side up. I'm going to put it under that broiler, should be right about there, and broil it. And that'll take, it'll take probably about 30 to 45 minutes or so because it's a big bird. But don't worry about the time. It's the look that's key. That turkey will start to broil, and the skin will start to crackle, and the house will smell wonderful. But the key is that we're cooking the thighs and the back and the wings. The heat from that broiler won't see the breast at all. So the breast is not cooking. And I like to let it go. It's at least about 45 minutes, and I really let it go long, so sometimes it's even blackened and blistered because there's very little meat on the back to stop it from cooking. And a little longer is better because that's giving those legs a big, big head start along the way. So let it go for a while, and if I always say in cooking, you need to know when to go too long, when to go too short. On the back side, go a little long, it won't hurt anything. Once that's done, and this is the only tricky part, remember the top of the bird is hot. If you take it out of the oven, but the bottom is cold, we're just going to flip it over in that roasting pan. Even if you put your hand on the breast now, it'll still be barely warm, probably cool, because it's been under the bird and you don't see that broiler heat at all. But the legs are very, very, very hot. So then we put it back into the broiler with the breast up. This will only take maybe 10-15 minutes at most for that breast to brown up. Again, it's not the time as much as the look. Everyone's oven's different, everyone's turkey is different. Heck, everybody's different for that matter. So you just look for that nice rich color to develop on the skin. Now someone might ask, well, should I put oil on it or not oil on it? I tell you, if you feel better with oil on it, put oil on it. You don't even have to. I usually rub a little bit of oil on it to help the heat distribute, but it doesn't really make that big a difference. All those little fangle things of basting and deuce and that, they don't really do that much. It's more controlling the heat, so you're roasting it, not baking it. Now once that top is brown, here's the trick. We then switch the oven to bake. Okay, well that's going to turn the broiler off is all it's doing. And then I set the oven to 400 and close the door. Now that oven has started to heat up now because that broiler's been going. It's probably at 350 or so. But I set it at 400 so the element on the bottom will come on and heat that oven up to what I call a good starting point. For sure the oven's 400 and the bird is in there. Then, once it gets going, I turn it down to 350. And what that does is going to let that oven slowly kind of cool off. So I'll roast it for, say, an hour at 350. Then after that, I'll turn it down to 300 for maybe an hour. And just an hour is fine. And then I'll turn it all the way down to 250, slowly turning the oven down. And why? Because we're mimicking a rotisserie in front of a fireplace. And what happens in front of a fireplace? Unless you keep throwing on more wood, the wood slowly burns out. And so what we're doing is we're actually mimicking a fireplace in the oven by letting that heat drop off. And the turkey keeps absorbing the heat, but slower and slower. Why? Because it's more and more cooked. By the end, if the turkey only needs to cook 10% more, we only need a little bit of heat. So that heat is slowly going down. Now the best part, even sometimes 225, that the temperature of the oven is closer to the turkey's temperature when it's fully cooked. So it won't tend to overcook on us and we can be more relaxed. In other words, I cook it 10-15 minutes too long, it's such a low temperature it won't make a difference. Happens to me all the time. I'm enjoying a glass of wine, whoops, I forgot about the turkey. No problem, I turn the oven down. So at that point then, there'll be some juices piling up in the pan. And if you want to be dramatic, you can baste the turkey with it. But I always like to check, and I can usually tell just by touching if the turkey's done. But getting a little quick read thermometer like one of these gadgets, not very expensive, will tell you what the temperature is, and you just sort of insert it right into that leg there, right into the thigh, and it should read about 165. You could check the breast too, and it'll probably be almost the same, because we're trying to solve that riddle of how do you cook two things at the same time with different rates. Well, it turns out they will be, except when they're finished nice and slow, they're going to be very, very moist. And there you have it. That's my method, my time traveling method for roasting a turkey. You want to kind of mimic a rotisserie inside your oven, like you're cooking that turkey in a fireplace. And it'll work for any size turkey. The bigger the turkey is, you just let it go longer at that 250 setting where it can go very slowly and finish all the way to the bone. It will be the most moist turkey you've ever had. I have confidence in it because it's how I'm going to do it this Thanksgiving. And from RDG and the whole group here, I wish you all a happy Thanksgiving and that your turkeys turn out great.